denke, wir können starten. Herzlich willkommen zur Mittagsession, zur Keynote 2. Canada Bayern, was können wir voneinander lernen? Ich glaube, die Unterschiede können nicht größer sein. Bayern mit einer doch nicht unerheblichen Anzahl an Bevölkerungsanteil in der Bundesrepublik Deutschland, Kanada mit seinen unendlichen Weiten und gemessen an der Gesamtbevölkerungszahl leben etwa nur die Hälfte der Einwohner von Deutschland in Kanada. Nichtsdestotrotz hat das kanadische Rettungsdienstsystem hervorragende Aspekte, von denen wir glauben, voneinander lernen zu können. Ich freue mich heute ganz besonders mit meinen beiden Kollegen aus Regensburg und aus Ontario, nämlich zum einen M.Nolan, er ist Chef und Direktor des Paramedic Services in Regensburg County, das ist in Ontario, heute zu diskutieren. Und eins vorneweg, die Kanadier sind uns in einigen Dingen voraus, allerdings muss man sagen, was die Zeit angeht, sind wir 6 Stunden hinter uns, da ist es jetzt 7 Uhr am Vormittag und insofern freut es mich sehr, lieber Chief M.Nolan, dass du heute bei uns bist. Sie dürfen sich nicht irritieren lassen. Der Herr, der dort eine Rettungsdienstjacke des Bayerischen Roten Kreuzes trägt, ist der Kanadier. Und nicht umgekehrt, das liegt daran, dass wir vor einiger Zeit im Rahmen eines partnerschaftlichen Austausches einmal die Dienstkleidung getauscht haben. Wir sehen mich heute mit einem weißen Hemd. Ich habe also, um die Verwechslungen vorzubeugen, nicht meinen kanadischen Anzug angezogen. Zum Zweiten darf ich ganz herzlich begrüßen Sebastian Gerosch. Er ist seit Donnerstag Leiter Rettungsdienst beim Bayerischen Roten Kreuz in Regensburg und war vor dem 8 Jahre der stellvertretende Rettungsdienstleiter. Und er hat dort die intensiven Erfahrungen durch mehrere Besuche auch des kanadischen Systems kennengelernt. Und wir möchten Sie heute einladen, in dieser Keynote gemeinsam über die Unterschiede, die den Rettungsdienst in Bayern und in Kanada ausmachen, zu diskutieren. Nach dieser kurzen Einführung auf Deutsch bitte ich um Verständnis, was unseren kanadischen Gast angeht, dass wir die weitere Session in Englisch starten und durchführen werden. So, Mike, nice to see you. I'm happy you'll be here on the German Paramedic Service Symposium. Mike, at the beginning, it might be very interesting for us to learn something about the structures of the Canadian Paramedic Service. Therefore, my first question to you: how is the Canadian EMS organized and financed and structured? Maybe you can also draw a comparison on our German structure, so where is possible for you.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian, and good morning to you and all of your delegates at today's conference. It's really an honor to be invited to share our experiences with you, and as we have in the past, you've been very gracious to share your experiences and your expertise with us to make us better as well. From a Canadian perspective, health services, very broadly, are described by the federal government. So the Canadian government has a responsibility to uphold the principles of healthcare. However, the delivery of healthcare in Canada is specific to each province or state. And in my circumstance, our province is in Ontario. You may have heard of Alberta or Saskatchewan, Quebec, Nova Scotia. Each of those jurisdictions has a responsibility to deliver healthcare based upon the principles of the federal government. They do receive funding from the federal government to deliver those health services, but they are also able to tax the public at a provincial level in the delivery of those health services. So knowing that we have over 10 provinces in Canada, and we have territories as well in the far north of the Arctic, each of those jurisdictions is able to deliver health services based upon the unique needs of their population. Because of that, there are also jurisdictional differences in the way healthcare and paramedic services are administered. For example, many of the provinces of Canada have a regulatory college of paramedics. So the paramedics have the ability to regulate themselves the same way that nurses or doctors, respiratory therapists, or occupational therapists would do in Germany. And having a regulatory college allows them to set their entry to practice requirements. So what does it mean to be a paramedic? How does that paramedic practice, and what are the professional standards? And how do they ensure the trust of the public at all times? This is very different than a government-led regulatory model that is apart from the profession itself. In a government-led, much like in Germany or in some places in Canada, the government decides who can be a paramedic, how they're going to be a paramedic, and when they're a paramedic, how they will function, and how they will work with other groups such as doctors and nurses and other allied health professions, so that it meets the goals of the government. Where you have a regulatory college, it's about meeting the goals of the public. And that's a very different responsibility in upholding trust and being a regulated health profession. So in some places, such as in the United Kingdom, for example, where paramedics have a regulatory college, it gives them special privileges such as the ability to prescribe medications because they have the trust of the public, and that is one of them. So in Ontario, so to speak specifically to my province, that Renfrew County is, the paramedic services are delivered by the municipal government. So the province has decided that the municipal government will deliver paramedic service. And to do that, they provide 50% of the funding from the province, and the local municipal taxpayer pays the other 50% or the other half of the paramedic service cost. And when 911 is used and paramedics respond to someone, there is a very small fee. It's about €25 that people are asked to pay, depending on their status in society. So if you're a senior citizen or you're older, pension, you don't have to pay. If you're very young, you don't have to pay. If you are in an institutional long-term care setting or a retirement home, you don't have to pay. So really, it's only those people like you and I that would have to pay for the paramedic service because we have the means or the money to be able to pay for that service. And again, it's about €25. So really, it's just a reminder that the service isn't free to everyone else, but that you have a responsibility should you choose to use the service. None of that money comes back to the paramedic service. That money remains within the healthcare budget. So there's no incentive like in the American model, for example, where we have a credit card ready to go with our patients. It's not a conversation. It's just a bill later on, and if we can pay, that's great. That's okay. So anyway, Sebastian, I hope that gives a little bit of an overview in terms of the regulatory model and as well some of the financial and service delivery model questions. And I'm sure you may have more questions for me if there are specific answers here.
Okay, so thank you. And one more question. What tasks are doctors entrusted with viewing your system? What do they contribute to make a well-functioning emergency medical service?
Yeah, so again, province by province, there are some differences, but generally speaking, each paramedic service or each area has a doctor who works at a standards level. So the doctors help the paramedic service and the paramedics establish clinical standards for delegated medical acts. And so to be clear, this does not mean that paramedics have doctors running around with them in cars or in ambulances or in the public. The role of the doctor, like the role of the paramedic chief, like yourself, is to set the standards and to uphold those practices. Where a delegated medical act is required, so let's take, for example, intubation, the doctor and the paramedic service creates a clinical practice guideline or a document that the paramedics who provide intubation would receive. They receive training, sometimes from paramedics, sometimes the doctors are involved, but more often than not, it's paramedics. And this gives the permission for the paramedic to practice autonomously or on their own in the community with the same skills that the doctor would be providing if they were working in the emergency room. So we don't look to doctors to provide hands-on care. We also have some doctors that are available to paramedics should they have a question for consultation, meaning the same way one doctor would phone a cardiologist and say, hey, I have a patient that's presenting like this. I am a family doctor, you're a cardiologist. What would you recommend in this circumstance? This is the relationship that we have with the doctors. And that allows the paramedics, when they go to work, to be able to practice 99% of the time independently based upon the standards of medical practice that any doctor or any paramedic should be following. And if they need to have a conversation with the doctor about something that may be different or something extraordinary, they have the ability to pick up the phone and do that consultation with the doctor should they require additional delegation.
So Mike, thank you very much. I feel there are a lot of difference between the system in Germany, also Bavaria and Canada. So Sebastian, I ask you, you were in Canada twice and you have seen yourself the system there, especially also the differences. What do you see? Where is the difference between both systems?
Well, thank you, Sebastian. The first thing that struck me about the Canadian paramedics is their professional identity due to their self-administration, I think. In comparison, I think most colleagues in Canada feel a bit more proud of what they do and than the specialists in Europe are. And very often they live their job as a profession or better as a passion and not as much the passion as a job. This may also be due to the fact that Canadian paramedics no longer only focus on treating emergencies, but on health as a holistic asset of their patients. While we are still training people to become emergency managers in Germany, the demand is going in a direction that we have yet to learn how to serve. Namely, to focus on complex health problems to which we cannot and do not always have to react with a transport to an emergency room. So it shouldn't be forgotten that in Germany, we are just at the beginning of a profession development away from the pure doctor's assistant to a professional group that thinks and acts sometimes independently. And the hurdles and resistances are, of course, still enormous, but I think we are on a good way. And in Canada, the colleagues are more involved on an equal level in the further development of their system. So, as a result, further developments in the system have their origin in the people which it affects. So you talk to the paramedics and not just about them. Independent research is, for my opinion, one of the keys to success. So, of course, one of the most impressive projects for me is the community paramedic system, which, to my knowledge, has been rolled out nationwide, Mike, and based on learnings from Renfrew County, where Mike and J.D. Heffern, our friends, are the fathers of the system.
So, thank you, Sebastian. I think the paramedic, the community paramedic is very impressive for you, but first there are some questions in the chat. I will talk about the questions later on. But first, Sebastian, you see the challenges that Canadians face, and are there parallels to the problems we have here?
Of course, the Canadians also have to struggle with problems that are very similar to those we have in Germany or Europe. Just to take the demographic development, social isolation and loneliness, overworked family doctors and health facilities, overcrowded emergency rooms, and the paramedic service as the last anchor for those seeking help. So full emergency rooms also lead in Canada sometimes to extremely long handover times to get the patient in the emergency room, with the consequence that all ambulances are occupied, long distances to the patient or to an appropriate hospital have to imagined there in a different dimension, because travel times of 30 or 60 minutes are at most the lower average in Canada. So if we perceive 50 kilometers as a long journey, the Canadian paramedic would be happy about the short hop. So there are some differences, but the average of the problems is the same.
So thank you. Let's talk about the community paramedics. I see there is such an impression on you. Why did it?
Well, Canada, but now also many other countries such as Ireland and England, not to mention the United States, have thus made their ability to react to the same changed requirements as in Germany on the part of society more flexible and needs-based. So, like the colleague told us in the morning, the paramedic system in Germany always can answer with an ambulance and the transport to the hospital. And in Canada, they come a huge bit far ahead of the situation than we have, and have been able to contain the growth rates of transports recently.
Yeah, so very interesting. Mike, for you, what aspect of the community paramedic system do you think is the key point that has enabled you to slow down the increase of UVIC numbers? Do you think the community paramedics are game changers?
I absolutely think community paramedics are game changers in a number of ways. First of all, culturally, for our profession, community paramedicine has forced us to think and look differently at ourselves and what our role is. No longer are paramedic services reactive. We can actually be proactive in terms of our relationship with the community. We also know our community and our vulnerable populations extremely well. So because we as paramedics often know who has had an increased number of falls, for example, or whose husband just died, or who is on many different medications and spends a lot of time in the hospital, that gives us an advantage to be able to present ourselves in that person's life in a way where we can support their goals of care. Because I don't know any person in Canada or in Germany who would say, my goal is to spend time in hospital. My goal is to call for paramedics every night because I fall and end up on the floor next to my bed. People's goals are to have an improved quality of life and be able to take care of themselves. I think that that's universally true. Community paramedics represent an opportunity where our patients and our vulnerable populations have the assistance of a paramedic to take care of themselves. As paramedics, we're trained to take care of our patients. The goal of community paramedicine is not to take care of our patients. It's to help our patients take care of themselves. So because of this, when we think about decreased usage of the 911 or the emergency paramedics and the ambulance, just because we can have an ambulance and take people to hospital doesn't mean that that is the right treatment itself. What it means is that we're going to then put that patient into a different part of the healthcare system that is very busy, that is very expensive, and isn't necessarily going to meet their goals of staying home safely and being able to take care of themselves. So community paramedicine, when targeted with the right population, those who are vulnerable and have specific needs, and get the assistance of community paramedics, can save the healthcare system over €5 for every €1 that is spent investing in community paramedics. And secondly, those people have a very high satisfaction rate knowing that the paramedics and the community paramedics are available to them depending on what their problems are. To only give people the choice of calling paramedics and an ambulance and taking them to the hospital just because we can really is not the system that our generation or the next generation is going to expect, when what they want is to stay home and to take care of themselves safely. Community paramedics allow that to happen, which then decreases pressures across the healthcare system and saves government a lot of money.
So that's very impressive. I think it could be a game changer. And so Sebastian, when the community paramedics are a game changer in Canada, can we copy and paste it for our system to solve all the problems we have the whole day here?
Well, I think we can, because we have the same problems in our health systems, we can copy the idea, but not one-to-one the system. It's difficult to always adopt the ideas of other countries one-to-one, especially because of the different legal embeddings of the paramedic services in different countries. So we heard about the finance system, how the paramedic service in Canada is financed, and this is a little bit more complicated in Germany. So we have more people to convince about this idea, but you can adapt and change the idea for your own requirements and needs, and that's the same what Canadians did, because they it's not in every corner of the country the same system of community paramedicine. So we have to change the requirements and needs due to our system, but we should not lose the sight of the same goal. So I think the idea can be a game changer here in Germany as well.
So fine. I think in another session at 3020, there's also Amber Holtnick of Canada who speak to us for the community paramedic service, and he has some more ideas and how it could be a game changer. So Mike, what do you think? What where are the biggest challenges in the Canadian health system, and how do you indeed to address them? Are you finished with your preparations for the future?
Always a good question. Where is the end? And I don't know. But let's start at the beginning. So, you know, as Sebastian, or S2, as we like to call him, said, you know, the opportunity, I believe, is really in understanding your own country's or your own community's needs as you design solutions, if you need them. And I don't make the assumption that every healthcare system in the world needs community paramedics. Some healthcare systems in the world don't even have paramedics at all. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa, for example, you know, we're all at different phases of our own development, and I think that that's important to acknowledge. We published a standard called the Canadian Standards Association, document in Canada, so that leaders, like all of the people that are on this call, if they were interested in developing a community paramedic program, could open the document and follow essentially a list or a guide on how to implement a community paramedic program. And Sebastian, I think it's probably important to note that the very first thing that we recommend when a system, a state, the Red Cross, or all of Germany is thinking about implementing a community paramedic program, or in many respects, any change, is that we first do a community needs assessment. We understand our communities best, but we need to approach our community in a structured way so that the programs that we develop meet the greatest need with the greatest flexibility for each of our own jurisdictions. And I think that that's critically important because people would say, oh, we want to be like Renfrew or the USA or Ireland or some other jurisdiction. Sebastian's absolutely right. We want to take ideas from that system because we can't just make it a McDonald's franchise and go, it's going to be exactly the same all over the world, no matter where you get off the plane. What you need to do is take the principles of the system, understand your community's needs, and then adapt your paramedic experience and expertise and availability to meet that need. I often remind myself and my staff, the reason that we do community paramedicine is to reduce emergency calls. Each of those represent a patient whose health is failed, and protect the paramedics who work on the ambulances, who do emergency response, so that they can be available for the patient who really needs that level of care with transportation to the hospital. All other paramedics in our system, whether they work in the emergency department, which we now do as paramedics, whether they work in community paramedicine or on our special teams, all exist to protect our patients and uphold their quality of life in their home or their place of work, and protect the important resources of our emergency response paramedics. We don't do this instead of that. We do this to protect that. So when we talk about innovations as we are moving forward as a system, we now have paramedics who work in triage and work in the emergency departments, shoulder to shoulder with the doctors and the nurses, seeing patients, again, to protect our 911 resources, our emergency response resources, to improve patient flow from ambulance paramedics into the hospital, and to also translate that transfer of care and that knowledge so that that patient can provide better care because there's now a paramedic who's working in the emergency. This is very important. And this is full scope, providing resuscitation, being a co-team leader, being able to speak the language of the doctors and the nurses and the other allied health providers, but also give the paramedics an assurance that the patient that they bring in the emergency context is going to get good care as they move through triage and the other parts of the house. This is a critical move for us to change the culture and the opinions of doctors and nurses in terms of what a paramedic can do. In community paramedicine, we have developed a new model of care because one of our greatest pressures in Renfrew County right now is that 30% of our population do not have a family doctor. So when we think about the impact of that, because many of our family doctors are older, they are retiring. Many doctors don't want to be a family doctor anymore because of the lifestyle and the responsibilities. So because of this, when we have 30% of the population whose doctors have recently retired, those patients are often the same age or older than the doctor who's retiring. So these are exactly the patients that we know, if they are not provided good primary care, they will very likely have health challenges. They will very likely need paramedics and 911 services. And as a result of that, we're going to have an increase in demand for service in the 911 side, when all we really need to do is get them good attachment to primary care and community paramedics so that their care is stable and doesn't have the problems associated with complex chronic disease and older age. So we now have a system as part of our community paramedic program called VTAC, or a virtual triage and assessment center model, which has family doctors, medical receptionists, and community paramedics all working together to make sure that that 30%, or in our case, about 30,000 people, have one phone number to call 24 hours a day, and that gives them the ability to access primary care virtually and have a community paramedic come to their home, provide them an assessment and their medications, their referrals to specialists, and all of the things that we all take for granted in terms of their care. This is one of our most important innovations right now because it's collaborative, but it also leverages the presence and the expertise of the community paramedic. But really what it does is it gives the public the confidence to take care of themselves. We need to change the narrative to, I'm going to tell you what's best for you, to here is a very easy to use solution at no cost, and we encourage you to use it instead of having the problems that result in an emergency call down. When we look at the future of the role of paramedics, certainly self-regulation or the responsibility for your own profession is key. It's fundamental to our culture and to our responsibility to the public. It also puts us at different tables in government to have a voice to advocate on behalf of our profession. It means that there are not bureaucrats, doctors, nurses, or others deciding what's best for paramedicine. It means that we are at the table having the conversation with all regulated health professionals to decide how paramedics can best serve the public and uphold their trust.
So, Mike, thank you very much. I think you will be well prepared for the future. So before we start in about 5 minutes, the chat and also the discussion, there's one important thing. So I think it's education. How is the training for the paramedics structured in Canada? And is there a way to organize the training by academically?
Yeah, thank you. And the education is the foundation building block for everything. And for a very long time, it was considered very technical, the work of a paramedic. We now know that with advancements in technology, such as point-of-care testing, ultrasound, advanced diagnostics, even something as simple as a 12-lead ECG, changes the relationship between the paramedic and their patient because the 911 paramedic has to make decisions. And I think that this is critically important. As Sebastian said earlier, the foundations of paramedic-led research that inform practice needs to be supported by an education system that respects and understands the role of paramedics in the community. That's not to say that doctors shouldn't have a role in supporting paramedics. What we've seen is the maturity of the relationship in Canada and in other jurisdictions where the physicians now see themselves as being supportive of paramedic practice, not leading paramedic practice. And I think that this is a very important maturity when we look at it in terms of our professional standing, but also in our own education. We now have paramedic programs that are university-based that work and learn with nurses, with doctors, with allied health professions, the same biology, the same chemistry, the same pathophysiology, so that the knowledge consistent with the decision-making and the communication skills associated with that decision-making are the same, respecting that doctors have an independent practice, nurses have an independent practice, and really when you look at the role of paramedics in healthcare, we have an emerging practice that is now better being defined by research led by paramedics and the evidence associated. So there is a movement across Canada to move towards university-based education as an entry to practice. So a 4-year university degree, which gives you both the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to graduate from that program at an advanced care paramedic level, which is the same level that paramedics have been graduating from in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and Ireland for many, many years. When we look at other jurisdictions, certainly even places like Turkey are moving towards university-based education for paramedics so that they have the ability to be trusted, to be understood, but also to be able to work more collaboratively with other parts of the healthcare system because the knowledge foundations that they have are consistent with other health professionals. So I don't think that we can argue that a university degree is a bad thing. Some would say, is it really necessary? I believe it is when paramedics are charged with the responsibility of communicating with their patients, articulating their care with other allied health professionals, and developing their own body of knowledge. So when we look at what an undergraduate represents for entry to practice, we also now have the ability for paramedics to do a master's degree and even a PhD in paramedic practice so that they can continue to inform the practice and evolve the practice through our regulatory colleges, or in some cases through government and their regulatory systems until paramedics meet the point of maturation to be able to move forward. And that's not to say that a paramedic who has a degree is any smarter or any better than a paramedic who does not have a degree. Often when we start thinking about degree-based education, there's a whoa, this is too much, because the people making those decisions may not have a degree themselves. So it's very difficult to be misunderstood in terms of the intent. Really what we need to do is embrace the fact that our profession is evolving. It's becoming more independent in its practice. And we need paramedics who have the knowledge, the skills, and the ability to be able to continue to move that forward at a level that is better understood by the healthcare system, but also as society. Most people understand what it means to have a degree. In most jurisdictions, people don't understand technical knowledge because it's so specific to a certain area that it prevents itself from growing and evolving as paramedics who have a degree are.
So I think we talked about the community paramedics, and by the education, you have a special curriculum for the community paramedics. How do you start the trainings for the paramedic to the community paramedic?
Yeah, great question. So in Canada, we have what's called the National Occupational Competency Profile. So at a country level, we now have a document that describes what it means to be a 911 paramedic and some definition as to what it means to be a community paramedic or a specialist paramedic or special operations paramedic, tactical paramedic. So these are all areas that are growing in terms of their definition. Right now, Dr. Alan Batt, Pierre Poirier, and the Paramedic Association of Canada are revising that document so that community paramedicine will have its own competency profile, which very clearly describes what it means to be a community paramedic in most places, most of the time. Remember, Canada, like Germany, is very big. There are differences from one area to another, and we need to respect those differences. But like a paramedic, there's a essential skills and essential knowledge. Community paramedics have the same. So because Canada is a federated model, each jurisdiction can currently describe its own method for growing community paramedic from a 911 paramedic. So in Renfrew County, for example, to be a community paramedic, you must also be an advanced care paramedic because of the knowledge, skills, and ability to be able to problem solve and support our patients in a different way. When we look at the education for that, because we were first to develop community paramedics by most standards, we also had to develop a curriculum and a training program to be able to meet those needs. My goal is that through the National Occupational Skills Profile that is currently being created, that all paramedics, when they are in school, will also have the requirement to meet the competencies of a community paramedic. So my goal is that all new paramedics who have a degree in paramedicine will also have received standardized training. We do not currently have standardized training across Canada in community paramedicine. However, there are a number of colleges and universities that now provide curriculum and certificates in community paramedicine, no different than many emergency department nurses, for example, who may go and take a course in critical care or in cardiac monitoring. Community paramedicine is still at that level, but we do now, through the standards creation, have a general consensus on what it means to be a community paramedic and what the essential skills are for that. Now the curriculum will follow, and I hope that by the end of next year, we will have a standard definition of the curriculum for community paramedics across.
So, thank you very much, Mike. This is great, and also thank you, Sebastian. Now it's time to look at the questions in the chat. So the first, Dennis Rupp asked us, does the free service lead to a higher rate of use in minor cases, or are those cases filtered by the communication center and the dispatcher? This is a question for Michael, I think.
Yeah, so this is from Mr. Rupp, is that right? This question?
Yes.
Yeah. So when I compare the free service in Ontario to the service in Nova Scotia, for example, or in Saskatchewan, who can charge hundreds of euro for each case, it's interesting that there is not a reduced use of service in the areas that have a high fee associated with the service. However, what I do know is that because the fees associated with requesting an ambulance for emergencies becomes a barrier to access for care for some people. I have heard stories, and they are just stories, but I have heard stories of families deciding not to call 911 for a sick child because of the cost associated with the paramedic service. Unfortunately, the only reason I hear about this is because of a very bad outcome where the child died, and the family was asked, why did they not call 911 and request paramedics instead of waiting and bringing the child in themselves? And the answer was because of the cost associated with the service. So I think that, again, remembering that people who do not have the money can still request the service and receive it for free. Older people can request the service and receive it for free, or movements within the healthcare system. Often those populations are the ones who have the minor injuries and are likely, most likely in fact, to use the paramedic service. We want to continue to encourage that. So as you say, within the communication centers, certainly in certain jurisdictions, so like Niagara, many of you probably have heard of Niagara Falls. In that case, they have paramedics working in the communication center who will directly have a conversation with someone requesting a 911 ambulance response. And they will be able to determine whether that person can be taken care of over the phone, whether they can be encouraged to access the healthcare system in a different way, such as go to their family doctor or a pharmacy, or whether paramedics are required on an urgent basis. That level of discretion is critically important because I'm sure, like ourselves, we are not limitless in terms of our ability to be able to staff ambulances and provide 911 paramedics. So being able to have a very high level triage in the communication center by paramedics or other clinicians allows the system to work smarter, not necessarily harder. And the satisfaction associated with those interactions is actually surprisingly good. And the interesting thing that I think has changed for all of us over the past 10 or 20 years is that the people that call 911 at one time, maybe when I started 30 years ago, expected to go to the hospital. Now I believe that when people call 911, they expect a paramedic to come, a paramedic to assess them, and a paramedic to give them good information so that they can decide how to best use the healthcare system. In jurisdictions like Nova Scotia, almost 40% of the people who call 911 do not go to the hospital. And some would say, wow, that's a terrible thing. I think it's a very good thing if we can provide our patients good information, good care, good evidence, and allow them to use the healthcare system in a better way than simply expecting to go to the hospital by 911. we need to disincentivize or reduce the number of people we need to take to the hospital and provide them good care in the home. And we can do that in a collaborative way, consultation with physicians, working with their families, but ultimately trying to prevent it from happening again and referring those same patients to community paramedics so that it doesn't happen when it doesn't. I hope that helps.
So thank you, Mike. Just another question. Ms. Mary, the big problem in Germany, a lot of people don't know how to treat themselves. They are so helpless sometimes. A change would be the leading of patients like Mr. Gerosch presented, and the paramedics with more responsibility. This is different in every urban district inside Hessen, for example. So, Sebastian, do you know it? Is it the same in Bavaria?
Yeah, so I think our experience is similar. I think you have maybe some different pressures at different times. You know, for example, immigration, language barriers, multiculturalism may contribute to different cultural expectations of paramedic use and paramedic practice. But I don't see it really as any different in terms of what I would phrase as a learned helplessness, being that we say, hey, if you have a problem, just call 911 and we'll take care of it. And I think we have been a part of that problem for some time. If you look at Stanford University and their chronic disease self-management programs, which came out in the late 1990s and early 2000s, really those are education programs for healthcare providers on how to help people help themselves. And so this has been one of the key education pieces of our paramedic practice, in that our community paramedics really have adopted the chronic disease self-management model, but we've done other things to support that self-management. So for example, a big part of our program is using remote patient monitoring tools. So if someone has congestive heart failure, for example, they may already have provided for themselves, but we will give them a weigh scale so that they can watch their fluid levels and ensure that they're not gaining weight as a result of their congestive heart failure. We'll give them a SpO2 monitor and a heart rate monitor, a blood pressure, and we will teach them how to use those devices themselves, but we will also teach them how to change their care based upon the results of those readings every day, twice a day. We also have alerts built into the system. So now we have a paramedic dashboard of all of our vulnerable patients in the community, because all of those readings come back to our command, our control center, or what we call our VTAC desk. And those paramedics are now simultaneously monitoring hundreds of patients who are the most likely to have a change in their condition and require a 911. So there are many ways that we can empower and educate our patients, but we also need to enable and support those patients in better caring for themselves. And I'm sure, like Mr. Chaka presented, paramedics have a responsibility to educate, not just to treat and not just to take people to hospital. If we change that conversation, then like in Canada and Australia and some other jurisdictions, paramedics are now the number one trusted health professional and number one trusted professional in society. This is a responsibility that only comes with engaging the community in a professional way, consistently, and doing it in a way that gives patients choices, including taking care of themselves.
So, Mike, thank you very much. Time is running, and so time is out now. There is another question from Pat. I think we have no time, but I asked you something about the community paramedic training program before, and if you want, you can also give him an answer in the chat. So, my brother, thank you very, very much. Stay healthy. See you next time again, and enjoy your weekend. And Sebastian, also, thank you very, very much. And also enjoy the weekend and also the next session. Yeah. Thank you very much, and bye, my friend.
Good.
Thank you very much too. Thanks for having us.
I think Amber can probably best answer that question.